Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another solocast. This episode is, in my opinion, I'm going to try to keep it brief because I could probably go for hours. And I honestly feel like this is the soul and the root of everything that I have done for the last, over a decade, taking care of families here in this amazing county of San Diego. And it's the reason why we are called Future Generations as a practice, Future Generations Clinic of Chiropractic and Future Generations Podcast, because it is 1,000% about the imprint that we leave on the planet, right? And that may be a little too forward thinking for many of you. But I care about your children and I care about your children's children. I care about how we populate the planet. I care about how, not only how our health expression is, but how we choose to critically think or not critically think over those generations. But over the last 2 weeks, we have shared videos on our platforms about birth, about pregnancy, about prenatal chiropractic, but then this week about delays, right? Developmental delays and baby milestones. And this is in the wake of a lot of just craziness over the last 3 years, right? And I'm going to say this very, very diplomatically. I say this not to ruffle feathers, but I will tell you that if you are in another part of the world and you have a chiropractor that takes care of families and they are not as vocal as we are about a lot of the things that we talk about, I can assure you that your chiropractor believes it. And I invite you to communicate with them in a way that helps them feel more encouraged, that helps them feel more safe, because different parts of the world have different different powers that be that leverage and wield different psychological operations that really affect our docs, and oftentimes they don't know. And I posted about this on one of my accounts that got deleted. That said, we're at a state of the world where two people who behind the same fabric over their face could believe the same things that are totally in disagreement with wearing them, but are too afraid socially to actually have a human conversation about it. And I invite you to have that. If your doc hasn't had it with you, that you have it with him or her. Why? Because it's time for us to recognize that what's truly at stake is our kids and our kids' kids. I was talking to a very prominent lawyer yesterday who is arguably one of the most important people alive. And he is not only helping people, quote, take title back on themselves. If you don't understand what that means, then go back to the solocast that I did talking about David Gradney and his contribution to, I think it was actually the Way Forward Summit. Or go back to some of the episodes with Robert Michael where he talks about the Social Security number as a bank account, and recognize that there are people in this legal battle for our sovereignty and our deconstruction of the slave system in a way that is far more vast than any. And he asked me a very direct question, and I was very humbled to be asked it because I just hold him in such high regard. And he said, has anyone ever done any like research on how this is actually affecting our kids? Is it actually affecting IQ points? And I was like, that's really interesting because I'm one of the only people. And I humbly state that I got this information from Amy Spolstra from Focus Academy, one of the smartest, most heartfelt, most brilliant chiropractors on the planet, with one of the most amazing communities of doctors really doing the work to unravel a lot of these chronic developmental challenges that our kids are facing. And she talked about how there are studies that are showing the effects of COVID, and one of which is a 22-point decrease in IQ. And I shared this with this lawyer, and he was like, "So you think that's it?" And I was like, "Oh, you better believe I think that's it. I believe that is the root cause of virtually everything that they have wielded over the last 3 years, but over the last several decades, in terms of how they create a pharma dependency, which is actually a physiological enslavement to the system." And I say this because no one will. And I say this because it's actually just now fact. It's black and white data, a term totally bastardized over the last 3 years, 3.5 years. But it is quintessentially clear at this point that we are affecting our children in a way that can intellectually and physiologically enslave them to the system for all foreseeable generations. And I say that just knowing, I mean, I'm a dad, my daughter's 4 and my son is 1. And I have this deep sense of inspiration and purpose and possibility for their future, but also a very real sense of, holy shit, what the fuck is happening? And I say this because I've been taking care of families for over a decade. And I've seen trends. And if you are a doc and you see these trends and you don't speak out about these trends, then let's effing go, man. It's time. We need all of us, and we need all of us just to say the truth. I don't care what truth. I say the version of truth that makes you feel so full of purpose and so full of conviction and so full of life that it actually just permeates throughout your community and your patients, and your patients will get better results because you are living your truth. But what we had been doing for our families, which at that time, so say, 13 years ago to 3 years ago, isn't going to be good enough to move forward. Because there was this 80% rule where, 80% of the time do a good job, and 20% of the time, YOLO, man. And I don't think that's good enough anymore. I think it's a 95-5, and I think it's a 95% is literally as perfect as you can get it, and the 5% is just pretty damn good. On one end, it's not an 80% of the time you're doing good, quote, and on the 20% of the time you're having donuts and whatever all those kind of, whatever the types of it's so funny. Like, one of my patients was asking me, like, do you never have fast food? I'm like, never. I mean, define what fast food is, and we'd like go through all these restaurants. He's like, that's not fast food. I'm like, okay, well, no, there's like almost zero chance that my family will consume fast food at this point. And this is not to stand on my pretentious, pedestal. This is just to recognize that I truly have studied for a long enough period of time that I understand the difference between an apple and a donut. And that most people might understand that there's a difference between the apple and the donut, but they may not understand the long-standing effects of that choice, right? I would and totally subscribe to the fact that it is far greater to have a happy salad or whatever it is. What is it? A happy donut or a sad salad, right? Like, there's definitely some significant validity to that, because if you carry guilt and shame over your choices, then that will permeate throughout the rest of your life. But I will tell you that the way that society is set up, and the way that our food system is set up, and the way that they have marketed virtually everything to you, all the way down to the artificial flavors and colors, all the way down to the um, synthetic sweeteners that they've created, all the way down to virtually, the seed oils and all the things that they put into our systems, to include our public water systems, to include the EMFs, and to include all the things that they put into our world. They have calculated it. And we have no concept of the level of toxicity that we face today. And so I say this because we are and have been very successful at helping families not have the normal, quote, medical interventions during, say, pregnancy or birth, right? Where we still have like a significant decrease in unnecessary medical interventions like C-sections and forceps deliveries and vacuum deliveries, right? And that's an important factor that I know for a fact that we, Dr. Ryan and I were sitting back over the last, he's been with the practice, 2.5 years, but he's covered our practice for, almost 4 or 5 years. And, we could only remember in the last, several years, 2 C-sections, right? And if you want to, compare that to the C-section rate that most of the world subscribes to, including a very health-minded county like San Diego, it's between 33 and 38% globally, right? If we understand what the World Health Organization, despite not caring who they are to some degree, they actually recommend a 10% C-section delivery rate, right? And then if you compare that to the top midwives and OBs in the world that actually care about doing as little as possible versus more, their C-section rates are somewhere to the degree of 1 or 2%. And that's an important factor, because if you think about the history of the world, when did C-section delivery become a thing? And it's only in the last century that we've had, this modern obstetrical environment that we've birthed in, right? And, since the beginning of surgeries, public health data has stated that the number one factor in the rise of surgeries in a community is based upon the population of surgeons. If there are more surgeons in the community, there will be more surgeries, right? And so what I'm calling upon you all to recognize is that whether it's prenatal chiropractic and a consciousness around the journey of pregnancy, which I find to be, and this is what my mentors have taught me, the most wildly, infinitely wise version of love and compassion that exists in the world, that is the only path onto the planet, is your mom growing you in the womb. That takes 2 half cells to 26 billion cells that no mom has to consciously control. That infinitely wise process is not only in mom, but it's in you, right? It's in you, because that's the only way onto the planet. Or the birthing process itself, right? Which is, and we've talked about the trauma of birth being the most invisible blind spot that is causing a neuromechanical, neurostructural stress on your baby's system that is driving, whether it's a sympathetic dominance, a fight or flight dominance, or if it is driving all sorts of other factors that are creating a physiological outcome where their digestion, their immune system, their sleep, their emotions, all of it is dysregulated. And when it's dysregulated, what happens is it becomes the label, right? Which we just had a baby come in 7 weeks old on Pepsid. I've been speaking out about proton pump inhibitors in our county long before there was a thing to speak out about. And I was in battle and debate with sometimes lactation consultants in my own office saying, well, what's better, Zantac or Prilosec? It's like, what the fuck is your problem? They're going to find out that something is going to be wrong with them at some point, which they found. Zantac had cancer-causing agents in them that we were giving to babies as young as now 7 weeks old. And I'm the a-hole for speaking out about it, right? So this is important. Why? Because they have convinced us through this ransacking of conventional prenatal care, that this infinitely wise process needs to be managed on the outside by the medical system. That you, mom, don't have this radically powerful intuition, that you don't have this radically powerful gut sense, that you don't have birthed within you, designed within you, evolved within you, this infinitely wise process to grow and birth a human. And that mindset shift alone is the foundational issue. Because when that baby is born, instead of having a chiropractor assess that baby, which we do for free for every mom who goes through prenatal chiropractic care in our office, and assessing the trauma of that delivery and pregnancy process, that is not mom's fault. That is just part of nature, right? Some of nature is traumatic, and sometimes it's really helpful to have someone measure that, consult with you that, validate your intuition about that. Because whether or not baby meets their milestones or baby has some delays is a result of what their nervous system is able to regulate and not regulate. And I will say this, one, because every baby on the planet should have an infant chiropractic exam by a qualified pediatric chiropractor, number one. Number two is that every mom should go on this journey of understanding the radically toxic and deficient environment that we are bringing our babies into, and reconcile that to the point where your intuition and your peace of mind just settles. I don't have that level of brainwashing within me. I don't choose that peace of mind for you. I can't give that peace of mind for you. That comes from within you, and everything that we measure helps validate what that intuition is saying. But every mom, every dad needs to go on this journey of recognizing that we have an environment far more toxic, which includes chemtrails, which includes EMFs, which includes seed oils, which includes all the things that they have put into our world, including the shedding and transmitting of this freaking bioweapon thing that no one wants to talk about anymore. Or maybe worse, the psychological operation that, as the rumblings of these things come back and the millions and billions of dollars being spent on testing for our public schools, is actually just to renormalize kids in the process of testing. And there's ethylene oxide in those swabs. And there's probably, different versions of vaccines in those swabs. And, all the other things that potentially exist. This matters because in the end, caring about our kids today and caring about birth today and caring about pregnancy today matters. But what matters, that matters so much because of how it influences not only your kids and their journey of normal development, because normal is normal. Normalizing abnormal function is the way that big pharma makes money off of our kids. But normalizing their function in 20 years, normalizing your grandkids' function in 20 years beyond that, is far more radically important to me. The episodes that are coming out are so foundational. The interviews that we are attracting into our world. This week, Melissa Sell. Last couple weeks, Matt Roski, Mark Gober. Future weeks, we have, oh my goodness, who do we have? We have such amazing episodes with Echo and Afraid. If you don't follow her Instagram account, you really should. And then Kale Akahi. I probably mispronounced that last name because I don't have the spelling in front of me. One of the most powerful conversations I've had in the history of this podcast. I told him very directly, I've never had this conversation on this podcast, and I'm grateful that I did, because I believe it to be one of the core ones to help us heal as a humanity. We are caring more and more and more about the normal and optimal function of our kids. and our future generations. And I am 1000% doubling down on my recommendations. It's very simple. Every baby, every kid examined by a properly trained chiropractor, pediatric chiropractor, prenatal chiropractic care for virtually every mom on the planet who chooses to navigate through this worldview that we perceive to be foundational to what that future world that we're creating, that is based upon mom and dad's deep dive into the toxicity and deficiency environment that we are currently populating. 80-20 is no longer applicable and no longer working. 95-5 is the only way to move forward. And your 95 has to be next to perfect. And your 5% has to be a close second. I genuinely appreciate you guys listening. And I hope this episode really cuts to the core, because in the end, it's our kids and their kids that matter most. Forgive me for the expletives. I'm pretty pumped up about this one because I honestly feel in my heart and in my soul that it's time. It's time for us practitioners, and it's time for us parents to step up in a way that we actually haven't yet. Love and appreciate you all.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations Podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.